On October 7th, 2024, I published a video highlighting the aggressive propaganda and complicity in favour of the Gaza genocide displayed by politicians, influencers and news media.
I think the media is part of manufacturing consent.
We're talking about you.
The media is manufacturing consent for genocide against the Palestinian people, just like they did with the lie of the weapons of mass destruction that was used to justify the murder of over 1 million Iraqis. And there's been many lies that have been repeated all over the news, including on your show, where CNN had to rescind, and even you said in subsequent interviews about the 40 beheaded babies. I haven't seen a single shred of evidence. I have not seen a single shred of evidence about these accusations coming out.
I was actually deliberately misquoted.
So this video will be an extension of that effort, exclusively focusing on the entity known as Piers Morgan Uncensored. Whereas the first video tiptoed a fine line between seriousness and sarcasm, this video will be a spectacle of silliness and delusion not seen since Joe Biden tried to debate Donald Trump.
And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Or when Donald Trump tried to debate Kamala Harris.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And of course Kamala can laugh then, but still lost to that reprobate. How can anyone take a platform seriously when debates spiral out of control this badly?
This man is being more slippery. He's being more slippery than the lubricants that he sells in his daughter's sex shop. And that's the reality of the situation.
Did you really just say that? You know, you seem obsessed with Jewish sex. It's bizarre. Yesterday, you actually spoke about Ben Shapiro's wife.
Yes,
you
I did.
actually, you said
Yes,
to Ben
I did.
Shapiro,
Yes, I did.
your wife's a carrot, well, you're more of a man. Is that what you're trying to
Yes,
say?
I did.
Then you said that Jews have BDSM. You're speaking about sexual lubricants while people are dying. You know, Muhammad, get your head out of the Jewish bedroom. It's really bizarre.
The Farrelly brothers would struggle to produce a better comedy scene. And this isn't even the worst example. Rest assured, we will return to this clash later. But Piers Morgan Uncensored was supposed to be a forum to debate the most interesting intellectual ideas of our time. Like, is it okay to drone strike a Gazan orphanage when there is a suspected KhaMas fighter within a 5-mile radius? Who could ever know what is right and what is wrong? Wink, 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 wink. Instead, Piers Morgan Uncensored is a vacuum where integrity, facts and dignity go to die, and die a horrible death. Piers Morgan Uncensored is a mixture of hypocrisy, indiscriminate shouting, and the owning of human beings we have not seen since the transatlantic slave trade. Do you know how bananas the output must be that I feel comfortable enough to be making a joke about chattel slavery, while being a direct product of chattel slavery? But who cares when you're getting millions and millions of views on YouTube, all built on top of the graves of Palestinian children? But don't get too depressed. Think of all that money, the lovely money he is making. Imagine I'm counting endless money underneath this camera shot. Now imagine I'm Piers Morgan. Disgusting thought, isn't it? Full disclosure, this video only includes YouTube recordings posted by Piers relating to the Gaza genocide between October 7th, 2023 and April 2024, because the content was really seriously starting to pierce my soul. On my soul. And to be honest, it irks me that I won't get to include Piers getting his back kicked in by Mehdi Hassan.
Russia illegally invaded and occupied Israel and illegally annexed Crimea. And Israel is doing the same thing in the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights.
As you know, they are completely different.
Yeah, Israel's worse. It's been going on much longer. And people living under much worse conditions.
And
they've killed more kids.
There is no similarity in these two situations.
Agreed. Israel's is worse.
His biased coverage being overtly revealed by rapper and journalist Loki.
Rupert Murdoch, News Corp International, which employed you for several years.
Yes.
Which actually
it employs me now.
It employs you now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting to the issue
Yes.
now.
What do you think the issue is? I saw what you tweeted. What does it have to do with me?
Not my tweets. I have a question for you. News Corps International had a charitable arm which funded the Jerusalem Foundation, which builds illegal settlements.
What's this got to do with me?
Illegal settlements in
What's it got
Jerusalem.
to do with me?
Do you condemn Rupert Murdoch?
What's it got to do with me?
Do you condemn Rupert Murdoch?
I'm not talking about Rupert Murdoch.
Do you condemn Rupert Murdoch?
I'm not talking about Rupert Murdoch.
This.
Or is sanity being broken by Mohammed Hijab?
What's wrong with you? Why are you not looking at me again? You're crying. Are you crying?
Because the viewers are seeing the three of us together.
I see that there's tears in your eyes.
There are no tears in my eyes.
What's going on?
There's a slight sense of exasperation.
Sure, there should be.
And when I click my fingers, you will forget I included those clips. So let's take a deep dive into: do you condemn KHamas through the lens of Piers Morgan Uncensored? It's no secret that Piers Morgan Uncensored is a YouTube cash cow, as mentioned in the introduction. But how has this happened? Is it because both sides of the argument are welcomed on the show and permitted to joust with minimal interference from the named host? We will get to that, but you can probably guess what the answer is. Now, despite Piers Morgan saying loud and proud,
for me, so far, as a journalist trying to be fair and impartial,
why does he insist on
playing devil's advocate? And you might think, I'm literally playing devil's advocate, but I'm going to play it anyway.
3 things to highlight here. 1. Why does the devil need an advocate? 2. Piers Morgan only plays devil's advocate in one direction, usually towards his pro-Palestine guests. 3. Advocate should be whispered when using that phrase in relation to Piers Morgan. It could be argued that Piers Morgan's combative style of interviewing, when talking against a position he doesn't like, is the main reason behind the surge in engagement he has enjoyed since leaving Good Morning Britain. Like a divorced dad showing off his new bright red Ferrari with 800 horsepower and a V12 engine, Piers is in no way overcompensating when he reminds us of his large viewership.
The last interview that you both conducted with me has had millions of views. This one will do again. We should keep talking. Welcome back. Last week I interviewed the Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro on the crisis in Israel. His powerful emotional analysis made headlines around the world. 5 million people have watched that interview so far, a measure of the enormous emotion and division this conflict has awoken. Millions have watched them passionately articulate their cases on this show, but never together. So tonight, on our final show of the year, we've invited these two big brains to debate the big outstanding questions on this conflict. Mohammed Hijab is a Muslim philosopher, scholar and YouTuber whose first appearance on the show was viewed by more than 8 million people.
And Mr. Morgan is a shrewd operator, knowing exactly who to invite back to attract the most eyeballs to his broadcast.
Bassam, it's great to have you back on the programme. I wish it was under different circumstances. I appreciate you coming back on the show. Yes. I think we should have a regular dialogue through this war. Joining me now is Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Regev, thank you very much indeed for joining us again. We will come back to this. You're a powerful voice, and I will come back to you about this. I've just run out of time tonight. I will get you back on again soon, and we'll talk about it again. I promise you that.
Piers has developed into a person that now enjoys the stink of his own shit. Truly believing the massacre in the Middle East could be solved by allowing people to talk in an environment that he has curated.
Thank you very much indeed. Come back. Let's continue the debate. You only get to peace in these things, I can promise you, by thrashing these things out. People that hate each other have to come together and they have to try and find places of compromise. Otherwise, you never get to peace. My next guests have clashed in the past on this show over the crisis in Gaza. Last time they appeared together, I said keeping the dialogue open is the only way forward, and they'd both be invited back. And so tonight, they're invited back.
I don't know about you, but I am absolutely convinced the genocide in Gaza would be stopped if two people with opposing views went on Piers Morgan Uncensored and debated. It's so simple.
I thank you both for your regular contributions to the show, particularly since this war started, because I really do appreciate it. And I want to hear both sides, and I think you both articulate your cases extremely powerfully. So thank you both very much. I appreciate you both joining me. It's an important debate. We'll keep having it.
Thank you.
Please, both of you, come back again. I appreciate it.
And I don't mean to brag, but I am a very capable body language expert. and these two definitely show signs of finding some common ground on the topic of genocide in Gaza. And this hunt for ratings even has me fooled into believing Piers Morgan relishes the thought of hearing pro-Palestine voices.
I'd like to get you back on. I feel like we've had a good conversation. I don't agree with you about some of it, obviously, that's been clear, but I respect the tone that you've adopted for the interview, and I would like to explore more of this with you another time. Cenk, Uygur, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm sorry it was your first appearance on this programme under these circumstances, but I hope it won't be your last. I think you're an important voice in this, and I do appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much. Come back again.
I'd love to.
No, seriously, this conflict's not going away.
No,
it's going to continue raging the war. I think you're an important voice in this. We should keep talking about it.
Okay, we'll chat.
Good to see you.
See ya.
Dr. Martin, I've got to leave it there. It's been fascinating. Please come back on the show again another time. I've really enjoyed talking to you. But I appreciate you have that opinion, and I appreciate you coming on the programme again. Thank you very much. And come back soon. I enjoyed it.
Piers even went to the trouble of inviting a person that wanted Muslims to boycott his silly little show. Piers is a generational talent when it comes to securing those big boy ratings.
And we agree on neutral manure. But I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And defying your own boycott. Okay. You've got to actually produce evidence of that.
Produce evidence of that?
Yeah,
7,000 children without
limbs and
heads.
I'm not remotely Islamophobic.
Yeah.
Never have been.
Carry on.
Never will be. Yeah. Right? Ever. Right back to when I led the campaign against the Iraq war in this country, against my own government.
This debate is particularly funny because Piers is whining his ass off. Why would you boycott me? I do like Muslims. I was against the Iraq war. Blah, blah, blah. I've seen babies on international flights behave with more decorum. But this debate illuminates an important element of the Uncensored brand, and the reason there was even a hashtag boycott Piers Morgan in the first place. Apart from the hunger to
coming on the programme, thank you.
Sure.
It wasn't sensational. It wasn't. But thank you very much.
Piers Morgan is incredibly biased on an industrial scale. And I know Mr. Morgan loves to articulate.
I have a real moral quandary about this.
And in case you were wondering, this moral quandary isn't questioning Israel's right to turn Palestinian children into liquid gravy. Piers simply loves it when Israel does that. The quandary centers on whether enough gravy has been made by now. So I can imagine confirmation of a ceasefire had Piers Morgan screaming up to the heavens, and that wasn't necessarily for joy, but as a recognition that he won't be able to exploit this conflict anymore. Putting ethical dilemmas to one side, Piers' bias is deep-rooted within a fundamental misunderstanding of the settler colonial project.
When you look at the full history of this conflict, the 7 decades of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
Calling it a conflict suggests it is a battle between two equal nations, when in reality it is one nation backed to the tune of billions by America against a collection of people under occupation or living within an open-air prison. Piers even recognises this fact, and that still doesn't negate from Piers saying this absolute dribble.
Of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
With this framing in mind, it is easy to see why Piers imagines he is being impartial when giving coverage to the ongoing genocide. Piers doesn't identify as Israeli or Palestinian, so fairness is assured.
I've done all this as a journalist and a human being, but with no personal skin in the game. On the issue whether I'm pro-Israel, I don't have a horse in this race or this war. I try and be balanced. I try and have all kinds of views. I don't have a horse in this race. I think I've tried to straddle a divide of being fair-minded with all sides. I've had all voices on the show. Okay. Well, it's not me, it's not me guys. I'm not on either side.
No, not you.
I'm not you guys. I don't think I fit into any neat fit on this issue at all.
But when Piers exclusively has to tell his pro-Palestine guests that he isn't you guys and he doesn't have a horse in the race, the biased interactions must be blinding. I think it's also noteworthy that accusations of bias wouldn't have traction if Piers didn't open a video titled Piers Morgan versus Ben Shapiro on Israel KhaMas, with an interaction that screams cute and long distance lovers.
Hey, good to see you, Piers.
How are you?
You know, hanging in. How are you?
I often wonder how many people ask you that question.
Yeah, I don't get that too much, so I was kind of surprised by the question, honestly.
Halfway through this clash, they even have time to laugh at another little joke.
You know, the media is a pretty adversarial place, and I think that, you know, again, I'm not going to speak to Elon's level of surprise. I will say that Don Lemon being Don Lemon is very Don Lemon of him. I mean, nothing surprising there.
Gross. But I think it should be recognized that Ben Shapiro has been able to have a somewhat successful career despite looking and sounding like a Cartoon Network villain. Now compare this warm and loving interaction with someone who is pro-Palestine.
An Israeli soldier.
All right, listen,
allow me to finish. Allow me to finish.
Well, yeah,
and don't
you can't
interrupt
just
me.
keep talking. You can't keep talking.
No, I have one last point to make, and I hope.
Here, Piers is intense, leaning forward and combative. Hardly the behavior of someone who doesn't have any skin in the game. Also, this behavior of not allowing a person he doesn't agree with to finish a single sentence is damn near impossible for Piers, even when Piers has agreed to not interrupt.
But if you give me the courtesy of letting me answer fully.
Okay.
I will defend the right of the Palestinians to resist an occupation. When you look at that...
That's not resistance, that's terrorism.
Homeboy couldn't even keep quiet for 8 seconds. And this makes me reflect back to this Mehdi Hassan critique.
So a lot of people look at that and they say, they get your intention, but it comes across as a bit of a racist double standard.
Again, 3 things I would like to mention about this clip. Admittedly, this was said in response to Piers Morgan only asking his brown and pro-Palestinian guests the question, do you condemn KhaMas? And never asking his pro-Israel guests, do you condemn the IDF? Secondly, I believe this observation can be applied to everything Piers Morgan has done during this current assault on Gaza. Lastly, the reason it seems like a racist double standard is because it is in fact a f***ing racist double standard. In my opinion, Piers Morgan should wear this label like a badge of honor, considering his obsessive behavior towards Meghan Markle and how much he openly hates wokeism.
I know that you, as a company, you're producing your own children's content to counter the left and woke propaganda and so on. So it comes to me there's a neat link here. Yeah, you know, Jeremy, I've got 4 kids and I say hurrah to that. Honestly, I do. I'm sick and tired of these kids getting grabbed by people who think they know what's best for what these kids should be thinking and doing. It's ridiculous. I think the wokery is a form of fascism. I've said this many times.
Unless he can weaponize said wokery and leftist politics to beat down a brown Muslim man.
In May 2023, Luqman Hakim, who's a prominent member of your organisation, called for an end to the secular order so that, quotes, the UK will no longer be able to pump its liberal filth, its LGBT filth, its feminist filth into the heart of the Muslim world. Do you agree with him?
To be honest, I believe Piers Morgan agrees with the statement he just read, but I would just let Piers speak for himself.
When I don't really have conservative ideology at all, but what I would say is I definitely feel more at home with people slightly right of centre than I ever will with the woke left. But that's my point, actually. I've done a column about this tonight for The Sun here in the UK.
So why would we ever believe that a man that enjoys writing for The Sun newspaper and sees wokery as fascism would also be able to facilitate a fair and balanced debate on the Middle East? How can Piers be described as non-partisan when he is more than willing to adopt the language of the IDF and the Israeli propaganda machine?
Hamas is believed to have around 35,000 terrorists. Hamas-run health authority says it's over 14,000 people have now been killed. You don't know how many Hamas terrorists, and I categorize people who belong to the Hamas organization as terrorists. Well, that means that 80% of Hamas terrorists have not been killed yet. I tweeted horrifying and appalling scenes from Israel. This murderous, indiscriminate Hamas terror attack on Israeli people is shameful and indefensible. But if you can't start from a basic humanity position of saying what happened on October the 7th was a disgusting terror attack worthy of condemnation, then for me, I find it very hard to then respect anyone's demand for people to condemn Israel and their response.
When you should go f yourself. Don't invite guests onto your show if you cannot suppress your bubbling opinions. And then we have this bizarre situation where the Israeli ambassador is sitting in front of Piers Morgan complaining about that one time the BBC was actually being fair and impartial.
As the BBC is seemingly afraid to do, to call this what it is, an act of terror. These are terrorists.
I think we were very vocal about what we think about it.
What do you feel about the BBC refusing to call them terrorists?
So I think if the BBC stands for accuracy and if the BBC stands for the truth, it's very simple. I mean, this is what terrorism is, and you cannot find any better example of terrorism.
So Israel went out and showed us a better example of terrorism by doing pager attacks in Lebanon and dropping rockets signed by celebrities on sick children in hospital tents.
I mean, the BBC's explanation is so bizarre. It's almost like suggesting that if you found a man who had murdered his wife in an apartment and you reported on that, you didn't call it murder. You just said that someone was killed. A person was killed, and the person was convicted of murder, and you still said they're not a murderer. We don't make judgments over here and use language like the word murderer because that would carry some moral implication. Well,
imagine the BBC did that and failed to call something what it was. I wonder who killed that 16-year-old girl. I think the clue is in West Bank operation. And who killed this activist? Could it be something to do with occupied West Bank? You mean to tell me a woman died after being doused in petrol and set alight by her ex-boyfriend? How dare she? I could do this all day, and there are countless examples of the BBC trying to flex their unbiased muscles in the weirdest of circumstances. If only Ben's critical thinking skills were as high as his vocal pitch, he would understand this. But as soon as Ben doesn't hear Israeli propaganda, he starts to malfunction like a Tesla Cybertruck. And just to close out this section, if you wanted a better example of uncontrolled bias, look no further than this video. What started out as a triple threat match debate on Gaza quickly turned into a 3-on-1 beatdown.
That's totally untrue, and I'm glad that you brought that up because Naftali also spoke at it earlier when he talked about how they gave the order to evacuate the north, and we all know that they gave this evacuation order to Gaza on October 13, and what did they do? When they told them there's going to be safe passage on this road for them to evacuate, they bombed that passage.
There has been zero proof of that.
There's no word for that other than
that's not been verified.
Debunked. Now you're a conspiracy theorist as well.
Oh shit, I didn't know that's not been verified was in Piers' toolbox, but I guess it's only deployed when you need to put a brown woman in her place. Now, before you start feeling sorry for this pro-Palestinian terrorist sympathizer, remember Piers Morgan Uncensored is generally a safe space for pro-Palestine voices, even if Piers repeatedly tells us himself.
And I think that nobody has given pro-Palestinian voices a bigger platform more consistently since October the 7th than me. That's despite the show, in my opinion, doing more to give a platform to pro-Palestinian voices since this war began than any other, probably in the world. Genuinely do not think there's a television news show in the world that has given a more consistent or bigger platform to pro-Palestinian voices.
Wicked.
But don't try and launch a boycott to stop the one guy who's putting up more Palestinian voices than anyone else in the world.
Why do you interrupt every 27.3 seconds with most your Muslim guests?
It's simply for the love of the game. Piers Morgan has moulded this world where he believes he shouldn't be criticised for the way he treats Muslims and pro-Palestinian guests because he is the only one providing them with a platform. But what Piers Morgan doesn't understand is that it is these same Muslim and pro-Palestine voices that give him this unearned credibility.
So I think we've had more pro-Palestinian people on this show in the last 2 weeks than any other news show in the world. And they've been getting huge audiences.
Nobody would tune in to Piers Morgan Uncensored if he only invited Israeli government mouthpieces because they can find those same echo chambers on Sky News or the BBC.
That I've had a number of pro-Palestinian voices on this programme in the last 2 weeks. I am not the media. I've given more of a platform to pro-Palestinian people, including yourself, than any other show in the world. I've actually covered this story, I think, more fairly than most people. I've had many pro-Palestinian voices.
Another interesting glimpse into the psyche of Mr. Morgan. He believes simply having both sides on his show means he is being fair, while deliberately ignoring his own behaviour during those same broadcasts. It's like Vladimir Putin maintaining he has free and fair elections because he has both candidates appearing on the voting sheet.
Explain to me why you consider me a stenographer for the Israeli government, given that in the last week, I think more than any other host in the world, I have given lengthy platforms to pro-Palestinian voices to articulate that side of the argument.
Okay, I'm starting to suspect Piers may have worms eating the part of his brain responsible for memories. He allows pro-Israeli guests the space to set out their arguments very well, while pro-Palestine voices are told to distance themselves from KhaMas. Very different approaches.
But you're the only pro-Palestine voice I've had who's even tried to suggest that what Hamas did on October the 7th was not as bad as we think.
This is true when Loki said it on air, and it is true today. Independent investigators have not been given access to the evidence, and there is the fact that Israel has contradicted its own stories by being silly and releasing the name and ages of all the dead from October 7th. Another truth that anybody with a Twitter account can see what Israel has been doing to Gaza since October 2023. We are constantly told that nothing justifies October 7th. So why has Piers Morgan Uncensored become a sanctuary for October 7th, justifying everything Israel is doing without condemnation?
What is a proportionate response to terrorism?
I suppose a proportionate response would be for 3,000 Israelis to go through the fence, gun down innocent Palestinian women and children, burn their bodies, burn them alive, take hostages, rape their women.
What the f***? Who the hell thinks like that? That is a very odd and specific scenario he has conjured.
You know, I've spoken a lot in the last couple of months of the moral quandary I feel about what is going on in Gaza. I've no moral quandary about what happened on October the 7th. It was an appalling terror attack. I've no quandary about Israel's right and duty to defend itself. The quandary I have is whether what is going on in Gaza is a proportionate response given the massive civilian death toll and given that so many of them are children.
Jesus, everything about this clip blows my mind. Piers inventing this moral quandary, this guy's face and creepy smile, the mention of a nuclear option, and Alan even quoted as saying, nothing is off the table in fight against Hamas. This has happened in real life and not an episode of Black Mirror.
I've always said Israel has a right to defend itself after what happened. I stand by that. Is Israel not allowed to defend itself from the worst terror attack we've seen since 9/11? I'm not blaming Israel.
No, all I'm saying is...
I understand the scale of what happened last weekend means that there must be an unprecedented response.
Exactly.
I think any country in the world that suffered what Israel suffered last weekend would launch an unprecedented response.
Unprecedented response is a euphemism for anything goes, and we might apologise 10 years down the line if anybody still cares. We saw this unprecedented response using Afghanistan and for some reason Iraq.
What has complicated things for me morally with this is that the scale of what happened on October the 7th was so disgusting. And the fact that Hamas has said they will continue to try and do the same thing again is that I absolutely believe Israel has to do what it can to remove that threat. And how you do that when they are immersed in the civilian population and that population is half children without massive civilian casualties on the scale we're now seeing I don't know.
So we should just let them do it, yeah? My imagination is so limited that I think you should just carry on with the genocide. I think the blood of Palestinian children is a price I'm willing to pay for Israel to get its lick back. And this guy claims to not have any skin in the game.
I really think the scale of this atrocity is so appalling that it will demand probably a disproportionate response now from Israel. I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu will feel he has any choice but to hit Palestine harder than it's ever been hit.
Well, frankly, I don't believe in proportionate response to terrorism. I believe that the way that you stop terrorism is with wildly disproportionate response.
Translation: if we kill enough of their children, they will never try to break out of their open-air prison again.
This entire war has been because of what Hamas did on October the 7th. I guess from the Israelis' point of view, what happened on October the 7th was on such a gigantically horrific scale. I do get a sense that Israel is in a collective sense of trauma and that they are determined that Hamas should not be allowed to perpetrate such a massacre again.
So it's not about proportionality to what happened, it's about preventing what will happen. What we've realized is that we have a ISIS state on our border. People who will rape, murder, dismember bodies, kill babies from point blank. So it's not about what happened, it's about the future. How do we protect and defend Israel? There's only one way: total eradication of Hamas.
Any other country would have reacted very forcefully to the atrocities that have occurred on October 7th. And if anybody else has another solution on how we need to deal with Hamas, I'm very excited to hear what they have in mind.
I have to highlight, Piers Morgan Uncensored is an environment where it's fine for people to say Israel can't help but kill those children because Hamas is standing behind them. Notice how this genocidal rhetoric is offered up with zero challenge from Mr. Morgan. This is some sick shit.
I mean, the scale of what's happened here is so heinous that I don't have any hope that it can be resolved anytime soon.
Ooh, okay. That's the guy that can bend spoons with his brain. I'm sure he will be a sound character.
You know, again, tragically, after this massacre, the gloves are off.
It seems the spoons have bent his brain.
I support Israel's right to defend itself. I think Hamas, by what it did on October the 7th, showed that it has to be removed. How else do you get rid of Hamas if you don't go about it in the blunt, brutal manner that Israel is doing?
By giving context to the situation and addressing the material conditions that led to the creation of Hamas. And the few times pro-Palestine guests try to give context to the plight of the Palestinian population in Gaza and the West Bank, Piers either swats it away.
And then we had the illegal settlements of colonization, including in the West Bank, were completely unremarked upon.
And I've already condemned
there was
the
mass terror,
expanding settlements of
Or he pays lubricated lip service to the situation and ignores it nonetheless.
And until it gets resolved, until the plight of the Palestinian people is resolved, until all these young people in Palestine feel there's some sense of hope and they can get out of what effectively is, as you say, a prison camp, then nothing is going to change. I don't think it justifies
Well,
in
it's
any...
not
Let me
just
just say, I've got to finish it, but I don't think it justifies in any way what happened on October the 7th. But
as I may or may not have alluded to before, the justification for Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza is most on show in interviews with pro-Israel guests.
have you changed your mind? Do you now accept there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
There is no doubt there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Oh my God, do my eyes and ears deceive me? Have we wandered into some common ground unexpectedly?
But Hamas needs to be blamed for that.
And when there isn't softball questions to answer, Piers is actually running preemptive PR for Israel.
I believe in Israel's right to defense, but there's going to be a tipping point if Israel is not careful. If too many Palestinian civilians are slaughtered in revenge for what happened October the 7th, the world The world's mood will change.
It's worth noting that when Piers says the world's mood will change, he is not necessarily including himself in that. He's talking about the general public with liberal sentiments. This isn't a call to stop killing children, it's a heads up that normal people might start taking objection to so many dead children soon.
That's why it's really important, I think, for Israel to be able to demonstrate to people that your mission is being accomplished. Because, otherwise you could be here in 6 months, a year, and the civilian death toll in Gaza could be over 100,000. And we might be having the same conversation where you're still not sure how many Hamas terrorists you've killed.
If you are still talking to an Israeli spokesperson when there are 100,000 Palestinians confirmed as killed, you are aiding and abetting in a genocide, sir, and you need to be in The Hague. Anyway, everyone is KhaMas is a phrase with two dimensions. It justifies Israel's aggression and indiscriminate killing of the Palestinian people. It also speaks to the fact that Israel labels anybody that dares to question their settler colonial and genocidal ambitions as KhaMas operatives. This includes anybody you can think of, including the UN. And we now know this label is even extended to their own citizens holding SOS signs.
Because you say you're being surgical, and you always say this, that you're being very precise, very careful not to kill civilians. But in the last 2 days alone, we've seen 3 Israeli hostages who had no shirts on, who had a self-made SOS banner that they were holding. They were clearly not terrorists, and they were shot dead by Israeli forces.
When you say they clearly weren't terrorists,
what do you mean by that?
There are several thousand Palestinians that clearly weren't terrorists slaughtered by the Israeli regime. But you say these hostages clearly weren't terrorists without a shadow of a doubt because one of them is clearly a white guy?
3 hostages who were literally fleeing for their lives to what they thought was the safety of their own side have been just killed in cold blood, having held a sign up saying SOS. I mean, at the very least, I think the world would expect that the people concerned who fired those bullets have been withdrawn from active service.
I'm not worried about them still being in active service. I'm more worried that there could be a directive for IDF soldiers to kill anybody who they suspect to be on the other side, therefore Palestinian. A fear at the time of writing, which was later confirmed by an Israeli newspaper.
Where Israeli soldiers say they have been ordered to target and kill innocents arbitrarily, including children.
I'm watching as, there are people out there who are rallying on behalf of actual terrorist groups murdering children. I mean, it's an amazing, I would say, exposure of ignorance at best.
In context, Ben Shapiro is calling anybody that supports a ceasefire a member of KhaMas. I never had Joe Biden joining KhaMas on my bingo list for this year. Out of context, Ben is just speaking into a mirror.
But I'll tell you what's even more heartbreaking. What's heartbreaking for me is various chapters of BLM supporting the Hamas terrorist attack. There is no resistance that includes raping women and beheading children and burning families alive. There isn't.
BLM supports rape, beheading babies, and burning families alive. This saddens me because I didn't get the memo that BLM started supporting Israel. What's more, this person was allowed to drone on for a further minute without even a hint of an interruption.
Specifically because the population is already quite radicalized and was radicalized before October 7th.
Again, in context, Ben is calling everybody in Gaza KhaMas to redefine them as fair targets. Out of context, Ben is talking about the population of Israel.
Piers, the facts are that 85% of Palestinians across the West Bank and the Gaza Strip support Hamas's atrocities on October 7th. That is the first polling evidence that has come out.
Over 70% of the people in Gaza support the actions of October 7th. I wish it wasn't the case.
Well, I mean, the end game presumably is security, not a sort of dynamic ideological scoring among a population that right now overwhelmingly supports the October 7th attacks, and prior to October 7th, overwhelmingly supported terror attacks against the state of Israel and overwhelmingly supported the destruction of the state of Israel.
Nothing to see here, folks. Just psychopaths using the Piers Morgan Uncensored platform to lay the groundwork for why you shouldn't shed a tear for murdered civilians in Gaza.
Palestinian Authority is not a moderate group. Islamic Jihad is a terrorist group. Hamas is a terrorist group.
Every Palestinian political party is KhaMas, even if they have different names. I think you understand now. Every Israeli talking point, the ones you wouldn't hear anywhere else, are given VIP access on Piers Morgan Uncensored, with little to no pushback. I guess we have to be thankful for the few pro-Palestinian arguments that are able to slip through the tightly controlled propaganda net.
They're witch hunting not only Guterres, you know, even the Israeli woman who was a prisoner in Gaza, who was released, they accused her of being a liar just because this old lady who's 85 years old dared to say that she was treated properly, that they took care of her, that they didn't beat her, didn't torture her. And then Israelis themselves called her a liar.
The Israeli president, who said shortly after October 7th that no civilian in Gaza is innocent, and that they should have overthrown Hamas. And because they didn't, they are essentially worth, killing.
But you can't blame Israel again for what Hamas did. It's again, people try to justify
it. You can't blame Palestinians, all Palestinians, for what Hamas has done. And that is what many actually, we've seen now, IDF soldiers, we've seen people saying this is a war with Palestinian civilians.
Do you agree? According to the most recent polls, 60% of Israelis believe, Jewish Israelis, 60% of Jewish Israelis believe that Israel is not using sufficient force in Gaza. 60% believe that Israel should, or the government, should escalate the amount of force it should use in Gaza.
You hear that, boys? Time to break out the nuke. I get the impression that the majority of Jewish Israelis hold the sentiment that Gaza should be flattened for two reasons. There aren't any Israeli settlements in Gaza, and a delusion that Hamas's problem with Israel stems from a deep-rooted hatred of Jewish people, as if the Palestinian people would be content with being occupied by France or China. This is something Piers Morgan also truly believes in his heart.
I tell you who wants the absolute annihilation of every Jew they can get their hands on. All the Hamas terrorists who crossed the border on October the 7th, who gleefully recorded it, boasted about it, and the Hamas official... Wait a minute. Hamas is dedicated to the complete eradication of Jewish people. A group that wants to remove Israel completely and kill every Jew they can get their hands on. Do you accept, though, that Hamas's whole raison d'etre when it comes to Israel is genocide? They want to eradicate Israel and kill as many Jews as they can. I mean, they've made no secret of this. I think that they have become increasingly vocal in their desire to cause maximum damage to Israel and to Jewish people.
Why does it feel like Piers Morgan gets a rush of blood every time he speaks about Palestinians killing Jewish people? And this rush of blood is going to his penis.
If Israel put down all of its guns tomorrow, every Jew in the region would be slaughtered. If Hamas put down all of its guns tomorrow, Israel would leave the Gaza Strip alone. It is that simple. The question is always asked, how could the Holocaust have happened? And the answer is this way, when people are actively in favor of Jews being murdered simply for being Jews.
I don't know who's going to tell Ben, but he kept mispronouncing settler colonizer. But I understand it can be a mouthful.
Hamas's stated purpose is literally the definition of genocide. It's wiping out people based on their ethnicity. The hostages who were released. But it has everything to do with Jewish people when Hamas's stated intent is to wipe Jewish people off the face of the earth.
Show me how many Muslims out there who condemned Hamas genocide. Why? Is it because Jewish blood?
And when the viewers start ignoring the ramblings of a man that is obviously sleep deprived, you can always draw parallels between October 7th and the Holocaust.
It was the worst atrocity against Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Who understand what it means when the greatest slaughter of Jews on a mass scale happens since the Holocaust.
What is a proportionate response to that outrage on October the 7th, which is the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust?
And I would like to mention, this is very important, that this is the worst tragedy to happen to the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Just think about that.
We also know that Hamas just perpetrated one of the worst terror attacks in modern history and the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust.
And they were slaughtered, literally. It's not just a terror, it's a crime against humanity. No one can remember such pictures since probably Eastern Europe during World War II under the Nazi rule.
And for many years, Israel has been putting off a possible campaign to topple Hamas, but the October 7th massacre left us no choice. It was the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
And maybe I'm focusing on the wrong thing, but this man's verbal cadence is particularly jarring for me. Nonetheless, the discussion around Hamas hating Jewish people inevitably circles back to the discourse about statehood and Hamas not recognizing Israel's right to exist. Oh great, the son of Hamas. Yeah, that was one too many Hamases in a row. Coming to give us pearls of wisdom from what can only be described as a prison cell.
It's not a secret that Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel. They cannot accept Israel or accept Israel's right to exist.
Now roll it all up into one big package. Get rid of the state of Israel and wipe out all Jewish people.
Hamas is against the two-state solution in its charter. It wants to eliminate Israel completely from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Free of what? Free of Jews. And then the signs also say, we want to clean the world of Jews.
What do you call the Hamas stated intent? They've made no secret of it. It's their stated intent to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, to kill all Jews. And that's exactly what we saw them try to do on October the 7th. What do you call that if it's not genocide? Hamas, from its charter onwards, and from the spokesman said last week, is dedicated to the eradication of Israel and killing as many Jews as it can possibly kill. When you have Hamas stating, since October the 7th, we want to do that again and again and again, when it is their mission statement to wipe out Israel and any Jews who live in Israel, when we all can see and hear them say this with brazen impunity, what is Israel supposed to do other than try to remove Hamas?
Honestly, you'll be surprised to know this. And people talk about, you said this, I have to correct you. I looked at the Hamas charter, Hamas themselves, yeah? In Article 16, even they say, you can have, in Article 31, they say that you can have peace between, they can have a shared land between Christians, Muslims and Jews. They even say that.
I don't believe any state has the right to exist, and neither do you. I don't see people taking up arms to bring back the Soviet Union, even though it should never have been disbanded in the first place. People and cultures have a right to exist, and this insincere act to suggest the fall of an apartheid state means the extermination of all Jewish people is disgusting.
And they've run the Gaza for almost 18 years now, and they've produced a new generation of people whose main aim in life, it seems, according to their textbooks and their classes, is to regard Jews as enemies who should be killed.
Okay, let's move on. Bringing us to the title of this video, the phrase which was probably coined by Mr. Piers Morgan himself. Do you condemn Hamas?
But why do you find it hard to start, given this war, this latest war that's erupted, began with a terror attack on October the 7th, why is it hard to not just say, that was terrible?
I don't see you asking Regev if he condemned the slaughter of innocent civilians.
You can't do it, can you?
No, she can't, because she's the same woman who said every Zionist before they die should hear pop, pop.
I'm sorry, that isn't funny, but the reenactment was hilarious. Do continue with the silly rhetoric, Piers.
And honestly, the only interviews that have got fractures have come when I've asked the question, do you view Hamas as terrorists? Do you condemn what they did on October the 7th? And if people prevaricate then, I have got angry because I just think that's non-negotiable. So do you condemn what happened on October the 7th?
9/11.
If you're happy to publicly condemn 9/11, why are you not happy to condemn Israel's 9/11? In fact, it was a lot worse statistically. The previous guest says you haven't condemned what Hamas did on October the 7th. Have you? And do you unreservedly condemn it? But what you are not prepared to do yourself as the ambassador to the UK, because I've checked your Twitter feed and you've not done this, and to my knowledge you've not done this in public, you're not prepared to condemn Hamas for the slaughter of 1,400 innocent people in Israel on October the 7th. Would you condemn Hamas for what they did? Will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th? Final, I only ask you one more time. Do you condemn Hamas for what they did on October the 7th? So just for the record, do you condemn what Hamas did that day?
A line of questioning which is so regular it has spawned its own meme, which captured the absurdity that a victim of Israeli bombing should condemn Hamas before they are entitled to receive empathy and be humanized. A meme apparently so sophisticated it confused Piers Morgan into tweeting the image accompanied with this dribble, and thus reinforcing the meme. In all honesty, that line of attack was effective in a lot of ways, because it even forced pro-Palestinian guests to not only concede to the framing of the question, but also provide an answer to Piers's liking just to move forward in the interview.
Do you condemn Hamas for the atrocity? Yes, I condemn Hamas.
Yes. So let's take it one at a time. First of all, as you rightly point out, on Young Turks, we covered the atrocious actions of Hamas right from the get-go, and we condemned it as fully as anyone can possibly condemn it. Because not only are they killing those poor, innocent Israelis that didn't do anything, those little babies and the grandmothers, it's disgusting what they did. But on top of that, they're ruining the Palestinian cause.
You're just ruining it. Look at my lips. You're ruining it.
Okay, who did that? I did not agree to that edit. Everyone knows I love Cenk and the Young Turks. Someone will be sacked for that provocation around here. Thankfully, there are some pro-Palestinian guests that refuse to follow Mr. Morgan down that rhetoric trap.
And I have great respect for people that do that. I've got to say, I really struggle with anyone who just cannot have the humanity to start by saying what happened on October the 7th was appalling, an outrage. Do you feel it was?
I think Palestinians are tired of that being the starting point constantly, when right now there are 6,000 Palestinians who have been killed in Gaza, over 2,500 of them children, 33 mosques leveled, hospitals leveled. So we're tired of that being the main goal of the conversation.
It's not the main goal.
Part of it.
It's the starting point of this war. Yeah, but hang on. It's the starting point of this war.
But the danger in you starting an interview asking me to condemn Hamas then pours into Israel's blind defense of its own state, which ends up killing over 5,000 Palestinians.
And that number continues to rise every day, with some speculating that it could be 100,000 dead Palestinians once this genocide is over. As we have already seen in the previous video, the reason for condemning Hamas on Piers Morgan Uncensored are the same as the mainstream media, politicians and talking heads. But there is something about the Piers Morgan Uncensored environment that makes you feel that all of these claims are delivered with a steroid boost.
So all of the condemning that Israel is receiving, Hamas should be receiving, because they are using their own civilians, their women and their children as human shields instead of having them evacuate.
I fully understand it, and I blame it 100% on Hamas, which uses children as human shields. It has a strategy. Its supporters call it the CNN strategy. I'm more direct. I call it the dead baby strategy.
So how many civilians will die is largely a function of Hamas's decisions, because Hamas has a specific strategy of trying to kill as many Israeli civilians as they can, as they did on October 7th, and trying to get as many of their own civilians killed, which they do by hiding in tunnels under populated areas, basing themselves in schools, in hospitals. Their strategy is to roll up their civilian death toll.
So the IDF in Israel is doing the best that we can to have as little amount of casualties as possible, but you know very well that this is Hamas's objective, to have as many casualties as we possibly can, exactly because they want Israel to be in the center stage and be called out on. And this is what's happening, and we need to resist that. We need to resist that with every power, with every fiber of our being.
It takes a lot of chutzpah to go on an international broadcast to say Hamas wants us to kill all their citizens, so we have to oblige. How can anyone call Hamas a death cult when Israel is literally doing 99% of the murdering?
Yes, sometimes the Hamas terrorists use civilians as human shields, but I wouldn't trust Hamas's statements.
The Hamas deliberately use them as a human shield.
All these things Israel is doing, something that not in the past other countries did for enemy population. Now, we are dealing with a terror organization that as a strategy use the people and the children and the women as human shields.
When you are given space to tell a lie without opposition, even you start to believe it after a while.
It is terrorism. It's terrorism by Hamas, taking human shields, putting children in the way of Israel's legitimate military concerns.
Hamas is really smart. When they decide to rocket Israel, they insinuate themselves in the hospitals, in the schools, in the highly populous areas.
They literally hide their rocket launchers behind apartment buildings in the hope that Israel will strike back and have to kill civilians in the process. Israel cares significantly more about civilian casualties in Gaza than Hamas ever has.
It's a fact that Hamas used civilians as human shields. It's a fact. Then it's a fact that Israel called and warned civilians to evacuate buildings before they strike them. But in the meantime, Hamas put roadblocks to stop civilians from evacuating to safe zones.
How do we get authorities to do a welfare check on the son of Hamas? Piers could be accused of exploitation of the vulnerable at this point. Nevertheless, none of these assertions hold up when you actually understand what taking human shields really means. Also, IDF soldiers know exactly what it means to take human shields.
And that they have used Palestinians as human shields for their operations in Gaza.
But the issue of human shields, the definition of human shields is holding civilians against their will and putting them in front of you in combat to deter enemy fire. And the only party in this conflict that has ever done that, documented by major human rights organizations and a matter of fact, is actually the Israeli military using Palestinian civilians, including children, as human shields. That was a matter of policy from 2000 until 2005. The Israeli Supreme Court said that has to come to an end in 2005. The Israeli military protested that decision because it is very useful for them to continue using Palestinian civilians as human shields. And even though the Israeli Supreme Court banned it, the Israeli military continues to use it to this day. There have been numerous occasions documented by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, and other organizations.
But of course, Hamas can still be categorized as evil for a multitude of different reasons.
I think Israel, as you said correctly, Piers, Israel is acting to defend itself, to destroy a brutal and ruthless and horrific enemy, Hamas, which is guilty of the most terrible crimes against humanity.
Israel is not a terrorist organization like Hamas.
It's not the sort of thing a human being does.
No.
It's an animal.
And as I'm carrying this to remind everyone, there are over 138 innocent people kept hostage in Hamas hands, including 15 women.
Mere fact that there are still 40 women and children in the clutches of Hamas, and God knows what they're doing to those poor women, that should be noted too.
So screw Hamas and their barbarism, okay?
At least the Nazis attempted to hide their crime.
Anybody with even a primary school level of critical thinking understand why these talking points have to be drilled into the watching audience with such consistency and uniformity.
Since the 7th of October, the first moment, Israel started preparing and putting together a huge campaign to delegitimize the Palestinian people, to link Hamas to ISIS, and then link Hamas to the Palestinian people, then link the Palestinian people to ISIS, then do the ethnic cleansing and the mass destruction and the mass murder.
But if Piers Morgan Uncensored is part of your daily diet, how would you not be radicalized against the Palestinian people with this output?
I choked up earlier reading this new revelation about 40 babies being killed.
Oh my God.
And some of them being beheaded. And I was like, how can any human being do that to a baby? I was accused by Bassem Youssef of saying on air that 40 babies had been beheaded. I never said that. I said there were reports that 40 babies had been killed and that some had been beheaded. The terrorists from Hamas attacked Israel. They murdered and raped civilians. They executed the elderly at bus stops. They took babies and Holocaust survivors as hostages, and they massacred young people at a festival. They may, it emerged last night, have even beheaded babies. I heard the story of allegedly, it's not been completely verified, but there are soldiers reporting that in one village they found the corpses of 40 babies, some of whom have been beheaded. And we know that grandmothers who survived the Holocaust were dragged off and kidnapped, and God knows what's happened to them. These are unspeakable acts of depravity. They were literally burned alive in homes.
Okay, where's the proof?
People were beheaded.
Proof.
Babies were killed.
Name me one child.
I cannot stress this enough. Piers wasn't saying any of these outlandish statements to play devil's advocate. These were his beliefs, despite no verification, and most of the claims being discredited later down the line. Piers Morgan looked people dead in the eye and said,
"I have no horse in this race,"
and
"I have no skin in the game,"
while repeating unverified claims as fact, which have only been posited by one side of the argument.
October 7th was a genocidal invasion of Israel, where Hamas invaded Israel, chopped up families in front of each other, burned people alive.
Well, that hasn't been verified.
The fact they put children together and burned them alive.
That's not been verified.
Tying the hands of little children behind them, covering them in petrol and then burning them alive.
God damn it, that's not been verified. Is Piers Morgan asleep during this clash?
Please tell me, what is resistance about such?
Nope, he's just taking notes to use in his next encounter with a pro-Palestinian guest.
My aunt and uncle, he's 100 years old and my aunt is 90 years old, they hid in their house as terrorists went systematically from house to house in their kibbutz and tortured and executed and murdered people, their neighbors and friends, in the most horrific ways. They somehow survived.
I'm not saying that I disbelieve Megamind, but I do have some questions. Did Hamas fighters systematically go from house to house and miss your crusty relatives, or did Hamas find your crusty relatives, torture them, and they still managed to survive the ordeal? It's now getting to the point I'm running out of steam, but I can see the finishing line. We could sit here for the rest of the day being told how evil Hamas is, but what is the desired output of all of this propaganda?
So my question to Ben Shapiro is, how many more son of bitches do we need to kill so Ben Shapiro is happy?
Given the scale of what Hamas did on October the 7th, Israel is entitled to
kill
defend...
children.
No, it's not what I said.
Go ahead.
They're entitled to defend themselves with force.
And if they happen to kill non-combatant men, women and children, well, it sucks to suck. Remember, this is said by someone who is apparently neutral and a human being. You couldn't make this up. Something else you couldn't make up, which I only ever saw pushed on Piers Morgan Uncensored, the idea that this was the exact reaction Hamas wanted from Israel. Forget the narratives about hating Jewish people, human shields, rapes and beheaded babies. More than anything, Hamas wanted Israel to carry out a genocide on the Palestinian people.
There is a theory that Hamas have done this spectacularly awful act of terrorism deliberately on a scale that would goad Israel into overreacting. How do you actually eradicate what has become a nihilistic ISIS-style terror group who've quite deliberately, in my estimation, committed an outrage of such appalling scale that they knew that this would goad Israel into this kind of response. And they don't care about Palestinian lives. They don't care about them. They knew when they did what they did on October the 7th, there was going to be a massive reaction by Israel. They knew thousands of innocent Palestinians would die. They don't care about their people. The Prime Minister at the time, the response to what happened that day was going to always have to be enormous, wasn't it? So my question is this. When Hamas did what they did on October the 7th, they will have known, absolutely known, that Israel's response would have been this. Hamas, when they launched this appalling terror attack on October the 7th, they will have known how Israel would respond. There's no doubt that the scale of what Hamas did on October the 7th was so overwhelming and horrendous that Israel was always going to respond like this. Hamas knew that.
But we all saw what happened on October 7th, and the idea that Israel was not going to react severely to that, or that Israel should not react severely to that, is ludicrous.
The fact that thousands of Gazan and Hamas citizens and terrorists went in and raped and killed Israelis, yes, it has meaningful consequences that they brought about themselves.
There are occasions where there's nothing left to say, so just allowing the recorded footage to speak for itself is enough. It also feels like that moment in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective when he realizes Finkel and Einhorn are the same person. When I listen to that collection of clips with my eyes closed, my instant reaction is, Israel is Morgan. Morgan is Israel. Morgan is a Zionist. Oh my God. Morgan is a Zionist. In the interest of fairness, because we'll never get it from Piers Morgan, I think it's important to highlight the moments where my reasons for not condemning Hamas were stated on the show.
You ask me why I won't condemn them. Because those young men were born into a concentration camp.
The reality is Hamas is a symptom of the problem. As long as you treat Hamas as the problem rather than as a symptom of the problem, you're never going to get rid of Hamas. Or if you do, by some fantasy means, get rid of Hamas, you'll just get another version of Hamas.
And you're still telling me Hamas.
Rahma, you've
there
just
will
given
always
me...
be Hamas if you occupy a people. Let me just finish this point. If you occupy a people, if women in labor are having to give birth at checkpoints, if you're having people imprisoned, if you're having this merciless bombardment of Palestinians, you are going to breed Hamas.
Question might be, why did the terrorist government of Israel think it can impose decade after decade of occupation and siege on Palestinians and deny them any prospect for a better future, and not think that there's going to be a reaction of sorts?
I don't live in a concentration camp, and neither do you, and neither does Emily. I haven't lived under the brutal conditions that the people of Gaza have had to endure for the better part of the last 2 decades. It's not up to me to tell people who are breaking free from a concentration camp how exactly they should do that.
The most traumatized children in 2005, this is before Hamas gained power in Palestine and in Gaza. The most traumatized kids were in Gaza. This population has been traumatized severely. Of course they're full of rage. I'm not justifying anything they did, but I'm saying, what do we expect from this population that's been suppressed and tormented and crucified for decades?
Before I close out this video, I wanted to share with you my top moments during the time I was watching Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Then I was imprisoned with Hamas. I spent about 27 months in Israeli prisons where Hamas was torturing their own members, our own people within Israeli prisons. They killed actually and tortured hundreds of prisoners. And this is when I start asking myself the question, what if Hamas become the ruler at some point?
Is there any deal to ever be done with Hamas? You know Hamas very well, obviously, through your father. Is there any deal to be done with a group like this now?
There is no deal with the devil.
Over 1,000
200 people were slaughtered. And you said it, children, babies, elderly, women, men. You know what? Dogs were shot. Dogs, pets were shot.
We have evidence in videos of Gazan civilians coming out and saying, that girl, we don't want to murder, keep her for rape. I want to rape her, that one we murder, that one we take hostage.
But when people refer to Amalek, they don't refer to the Palestinian people, they refer to Hamas, and Hamas is Amalek. Hamas is the Nazi party. Hamas are not heroic resistance people. They cut off the breasts of women and throw them around. They behead children. They put children and burn them to death.
One thing is for sure, you know the song of Martin Luther, the speech, I have a dream. I also have a dream.
Don't care, keep your dreams for your therapy sessions. There were also 2 interviews that were batshit crazy from start to finish. The first one being Piers Morgan versus Jordan Peterson.
I mean, a war is the consequence of an unsolvable moral quandary. This is a last-ditch attempt by the Iranian mullahs to use the Islam against Jews story to prop up their own dismal reign. And so they rattled the chain of their Hamas puppets.
And you know for certain Jordan was dying to call KhaMas dogs. This interview was a strange interaction where Mr. Peterson had a weird fixation on Iran. Who exactly affirmed Jordan's right to wear that suit? He looks like a Gotham villain that adopts children from the orphanage just to make them work as slaves in his silk factory. His alias is Master of Silk, and he calls the enslaved children Peter's sons, regardless of gender. And we know that Jordan is a real-life villain given the fact he tweeted out this genocidal call to action. And if you were ever in doubt that his scary Jordan was allowed to shape young impressionable minds, what on earth is he talking about here?
So I can give an example with Snow White. Well, why is Snow White surrounded by dwarves when she reaches the peak of her beauty? Why is she surrounded by dwarves? Why do they have to be dwarves? And the answer is, a stellar young woman finds herself surrounded by dwarfs. Right? That's the universal position of an extremely well put together young woman. There's going to be men around her who aren't what they could be. Right? They're much smaller than they need to be. And why is she waiting for a prince? Well, because she's a princess. That's why. And so you're going to be waiting, and this is the eternal situation of women. They're going to be waiting for not only their match, but for maybe for someone that they actually admire. And that's not to be found around the dwarfs.
Okay, Jordan, I think I hear the bell in the background. Your carer is indicating it's dinner time now. And the second, what the fuck, interview being Muhammad Hijab versus Rabbi Shmuley.
The children in Gaza are dying because Hamas uses them as bulletproof vests.
Okay, my position is after what happened on October the 7th, it was so barbaric, so disgusting.
So you can kill children?
Well, no, what you can do...
That's exactly what terrorists say, by the way.
Let me answer your question.
This is not a debate. This is someone else becoming the host of the show and now interviewing you. I thought we were being interviewed. No. Mohammed, you and I are being interviewed. You're not here to interview him.
You're going to have your chance.
Mohammed, you can put it down.
Don't make him lose control of his own show. You do this all the time. I'm not going to let it happen tonight.
All right, Rabbi, let me answer...
Please have respect for the...
No. Stop interviewing the interviewer and be respectful. And be respectful.
Let me respond.
Tell me, sorry, is it a terrorist organization or not?
I'm the first-hand source. I saw it in Kibbutz Alumim. They raped women. They had sex with dead women's bodies.
Really?
Do you even know the definition of genocide?
I haven't said genocide.
What's it? You just said it.
No, I said if you.
What is the definition of genocide? What's the definition?
I said if you do.
You always claim to be an academic. You're always touting your Oxford credentials. What is the definition of
conditional?
Genocide
if you do it,
genocide is where
you'll be genocidal.
Genocide.
I want to try and end this, right? It's been acrimonious. It's been passionate. I'm not sure we've achieved very much.
Finally, something we can agree on.
And just going back to what happened last weekend, it was horrific. And when I saw that the instant reaction on the streets of this capital city, London, were thousands of people out in the streets celebrating, some of them with Hamas flags, I was revolted that that was happening in my country. And the only correct response to what happened then was outrage. And it's been disgusting to watch people celebrating what happened to your people. So thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
My favourite thing to watch is an Israeli ambassador who joined a show armed with false and emotive talking points, left confused because the host has stolen the information and taken the limelight for himself. Safe to say Piers Morgan is a right-wing propagandist, loudmouth bully with crippling self-esteem issues that are only outranked by his love of attention, YouTube views, and money. This imbecile doesn't give a damn about the oppressed people of Palestine, and the fact he is so quick to mention his opposition to the Iraq war only serves to highlight the one glitch in his matrix and not his embedded philosophy. This
baboon in a suit
managed to apologize to Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Well, Jay, you were right, unexpectedly made several serious allegations about Jay-Z and Beyonce during that interview. As I said in the moment, they were not present to respond or defend themselves, but now they have. Their lawyers contacted us to say that those claims were totally false and have no basis in fact, and we've therefore complied with the legal request to cut them from the original interview. Editing interviews is not something we do lightly at a show called Uncensored. But, like the proverbial cries of fire in a crowded theatre, there are legal limits on us too. And we apologise to Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Before doing so to Meghan Markle, who was the target of his misogynistic and racist obsession. Piers has also failed to apologise to the brown children of the Middle East, who Piers has used as a vehicle to obtain record viewership on YouTube and world recognition after his embarrassing exit from Good Morning Britain. I suggest you either boycott or don't watch Piers Morgan Uncensored for no other reason apart from him simply being a tit. And I didn't even give him any views. I just downloaded the videos and watched them with disdain. You should put your energy into engaging with reputable sources of information, and more importantly, remember to boycott these brands that are complicit in the genocide in Gaza.
Do you condemn Hamas?
What they did on October the 7th.
Do you condemn
October the 7th.
Do you condemn October the 7th. Do you condemn October the 7th. Do you condemn October the 7th.